Hi, I'm Pastor Jack Hughes of Anchor Bible Church in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is lesson 4 of preparing expository sermons, talks, and devotions, and we're just going to jump into it. I know a lot of you are taking vacations and have other summer commitments, and so I'm recording these just for people in the future, and in case you missed a class or two, or even the whole series, so you can come back later and get it online. So let's get into the lesson. So here it is. We're going to do a homework review, text outline, talk a little bit about commentaries and sermon construction. So that's what this lesson is about. Here's your homework review. You were to go to the Anchor Bible Church website, go under sermons, go under sermon series, how to overview of biblical prophecy. And the first sermon in the overview of biblical prophecy is how to interpret biblical prophecy. It's just one sermon. And yes, it is slightly focused on prophecy, but basically it just tells you how to interpret the Bible, prophecy or not. And so I had you listen to that. Then you were to create a syntactical outline from 1 Corinthians 16:13. That is an outline that is derived from the text. You were to try that. This is a simple verse. Then create a second person plural noun proposition with the so that statement. And we talked about that a little bit. We're going to talk about that more. So if any of these things are unclear, we're going to keep going over them and over them and over them, giving you examples so that you can get an idea of how to do it yourself. Then we're going to create a title for your sermon, talk, or devotion. All right, so that's what we're doing. And here is the text. I'm including verse 14. It's not assigned, but just because the whole pericope is in verse 14, 13 and 14, and so I thought I'd do that. So there you have your text right there, and this is a pretty simple one. It's about as easy as one I could find. And here's what I came up with. Okay, 5 ways you can give God glory. So 1 Corinthians 16, 13 and 14, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, let all you do be done in love, which was not part of your assignment, but I'm just including it. So notice how the outline points here all come from the text. They're just repeats of what the text says. In this last point, do all in love, I just summarized or shortened what this text is saying. Let all that you do be done in love. I just put do all in love. Okay, but notice how each point comes from the text. Syntactical outline. So what you're not doing is you're not imagining things. You're not getting ideas from the text. You're not feeling things about the text. You're not borrowing things from other texts or your ideas from other texts or your remember of other texts. No, you get your outline from the text. You submit your outline to the text. That's what you're supposed to do. So you have your commands in red. Be on the alert, stand, act like a man, be strong, let all you do be done in love, the red parts. Everything else, or propositions in brown, I put, these are in brown, and then everything else in purple. In more complicated text, I have more colors and stuff. But anyways, I just want you to notice that. But what command seems to be central, the central command in this text? If you were to look, you just have to ask yourself some questions. Do you think all these commands are talking about being on the alert? Or all these texts are about standing firm in the faith? Or all these texts about acting like men? All these texts talking about being strong? Or doing everything in love? I think stand firm in the faith is probably the best one to take as the central, since they're all commands, the central one. Why is that? Because we need to be on the alert so we can stand in the faith. We need to act like men when we're standing in the faith. We need to be strong to stand in the faith. And we need to do all in love when standing in the faith. There. So I think that's the central command. That's what I would put in there. And now what I want to do is talk about some phrase searches here. This is something that is helpful, and you don't need to even buy anything, but I'm just going to first tell you about it, and then we're going to actually do it in Logos, and you don't need Logos, and I'll explain why. But I just want to show you how just doing phrase searches will help you a lot in getting underway in the preparation of your sermon, your talk, or devotion. So you try searching either for the exact phrase, try searching for key parts of a phrase, read hits to gain insight on whatever that phrase is, how the phrase is used, who uses the phrase, where the phrase is used. So let me just show you right now what I mean by getting intel from phrase searches. So here's our text, right? Be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. There's our text. Here it is here in green. All right, so we're just going to do a search on be on the alert, see what that is like. Be on the alert. Now, I'm just searching the whole Bible. Notice all these places where be on the alert appears. You have Jesus concerning the second coming. You have Paul with the Ephesian elders, be on the alert. You have our text. You have be on the alert in relation to prayer. Be on the alert against your adversary, the devil. And so by looking up these texts, you can see how that phrase is used both by Paul, Peter, Jesus, and get a good idea of what it means to be on the alert, maybe get some examples, some parallels. You know, Jesus uses this phrase, and Paul uses this phrase elsewhere, and the Apostle Peter uses it in relation to this. And here we are told to be on the alert. And since, you know, the text doesn't really say what specifically, be on the alert in what way? Well, in standing firm in the faith. And part of that is included in all the other examples, right? So there you have it. Just by doing a little phrase search, you can find out that same thing, how it's used. Now we're going to try stand firm in the faith, and you'll see what happens here. Okay, we only get one hit. Wah, wah. You know, that's kind of a bummer, right? But notice what happens if we just take off in the faith and stand firm, part of that phrase. Now we've got a bunch of examples, right? A whole bunch. Stand firm against the schemes of the devil. You know, having done everything to stand firm. Stand firm. Stand firm in the Lord, which is very similar to stand firm in the faith. Stand firm and hold to the traditions, which is the same as stand firm in the faith. 1 Peter 5:12, you know, I've written to you briefly regarding testifying. This is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. So you have, again, some really good intel that you can summarize, uses good cross-references, mention in your sermon, talk, or devotion, just on doing a phrase search. And then I'm going to do another one, but this time we're going to do in the faith. And notice I have a bunch of in the faith things that I can look up to give me more insight to what it means to stand firm in the faith. And I might use some of these key cross-references that I like that use that same kind of terminology to help people understand what it means to stand firm in the faith. Now, let's do act like men. Okay, there you have it. It's stand firm in the faith. It's just it. But let's just try like men. Let's see what happens. Okay, you will die like men. But here's a cross-reference, be like men. That's very similar to act like men, but be like men who are waiting for their master. In other words, anticipating Jesus coming. You have the crowd saying to Paul and Barnabas, you know, the gods have become like men. And then you have our text. So just this one cross-reference, but it's still a good cross-reference, right? And maybe from that cross-reference, you could find other cross-references to look at them. We're going to talk about how to do that in more detail later. But first, I just want you to know that we're getting intel for our sermon, talk, or devotion just by doing phrase searches. And let's do the last one, and then I'll tell you how you can do this without having Bible software like this. Okay? Be strong. Bingo. Look at how many times the phrase be strong appears, and notice how it's often coupled with be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and very courageous. You know, notice how it's often coupled. So if you were going to talk about this, what it means to be strong, like what is the Apostle Paul, a former Pharisee, an expert in the Old Testament talking about here? He's talking about being strong and courageous, again, to stand firm in the faith or to do the Lord's will, or, all those things are basically just describing the same kind of thing. But by going through all these verses about standing strong, you can find some great cross-references, some great insights of who is using it, when they're using it, why they're using it, and then look at what Paul is saying here and then better understand that phrase in the mind of Paul, the ex-Pharisee and hardcore Old Testament Bible thumper. Okay, there you have it. So let's just say, though, you don't have fancy Bible software, you don't have Logos or anything. Well, you can get it. Or you can just use a little app like the Literal Word app that has different Bible versions. You can put in phrase searches. It searches quickly. It finds you all the verses. It's really easy to use. You can get it on your phone, zip zop, man, it's yours. Okay? So something like that. Or you can go to one of the many websites that, like Blue Letter Bible and, all those ones like that. I can't remember all their names specifically, but because I use Logos, but there's a whole list of websites that help you study the Bible, and you can choose, it's Crosstalk or something like that. Bible Gateway, that's it. You can just choose your Bible version, do a phrase search, you can find it. So there's stuff. So if you have a phone, a smartphone, if you have a computer, if you can get to the website, you can do these searches and get a lot of intel. And you're not even looking at any commentaries. You're just letting the Bible teach you how these phrases are used. It's just a helpful way to do it. It's easy. And it's free. It just takes time. And so you can find out a whole bunch. Now, imagine what would happen if I was teaching a devotion or a talk or doing a sermon on verse 13. If I just went through those phrases, looked that up, I could write quite a bit on each of those based off of what I discovered on that phrase, how it's used, and how Paul is using it here in relationship to standing firm in the faith, right? Yeah. I'm already starting to blow out my sermon. Woo! And I put all the information under the correct outline point so I don't have a exegetical lumber pile that's all mixed up. Everything's in order. Everything's in the right category. Woo! That's very good. All right, let's go back. So now let's do another one. We need to do a sermon outline proposition and title for Ephesians 6, 5-8. But look at this thing. It's just a big, giant block of text. And when I look at this, slaves, be obedient to who are your masters. And notice this, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of your heart, as to Christ. All these prepositions in there, not by way of eye service and men pleasers, but as slaves of the Lord, doing the will of God, with goodwill, render service. Notice how, you can read the text, but how do you sort this out? Well, if you do what we taught you about what's the thing being talked about, well, it's obviously slaves. Okay? It's about slaves. Ephesians 6, 5-8. So we create a little text flow diagram. Again, you don't need the Bible software. You don't need to color code it. You don't need to have the lines. You're just putting the things that are being talked about to the left, and the things that talk about those are what they are or are doing to the right of them, and the things talking about that to the right of those. That's all you do. It's pretty simple. So we have slaves. These are the things being talked about, right? Be obedient to those who are your masters. Then we have these 5 phrases over here that modify or tell us more about this phrase here. Masters who are according to the flesh. That is, the masters you serve as mortals here on earth. And be obedient to your masters with fear. Be obedient to your masters with trembling. Be obedient to your masters in sincerity of your heart. Be obedient to your masters as to Christ. Notice how all 5 of these phrases modify or tell us more about this phrase here. There you go. This is the main thing being talked about. This is what it is or is doing. And these phrases tell us more about that. So I have that's why it's shifted over to the left, slaves be obedient to your masters, and why these 4 phrases come after it, because they talk about it. Now, we have implied, since the whole thing is about slaves, you need to also obey, because that's what this is, be obedient, the main command. Slaves, be obedient, not by way of eye service, as men pleasers. Now, a lot of times when you come to the Bible, you're going to find phrases that say the same things in different ways. To obey by way of eye service is to be a man pleaser. Okay? In other words, you're trying to please someone else's eyes other than the Lord. And Paul says, no, you don't live to please other people. You live to please the Lord. That's what he's saying. So when you have 2 similar phrases like that, it's described as being in apposition to one another, and that they're basically the same thing being repeated in 2 different ways. So that's why I put this little arrow right there, just to let me know that by way of eye service and as a man pleaser are pretty much saying the same thing in 2 different ways. Then you also have slaves implied, but in contrast, instead of trying to please men, but in contrast, you need to obey as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. So this right here tells us that slaves need to obey Jesus from the heart, right? And then also slaves need to obey with goodwill. That's how they need to render service. Notice, as to the Lord. Notice, as to Christ, as slaves of Christ, as to the Lord. I put a little, you could circle that, and I did it in my Bible software, but you could circle those phrases because they're all talking about the same thing, the grand motive here, as to the Lord. And then you have negatively, not to men, which we could, have put a red box around here and a red box around as man pleasers and a red box around not, because these are all the negative ways, not by way of eye service, not as man pleasers, not to men. Notice how he's contrasting, going back and forth, knowing that whatever good thing each one of you does in obeying in the Lord as a good slave, this he will receive back from the Lord. You're going to be rewarded, whether slave or free. So it applies to everybody, not just slaves. So there you have it. Now here's the outline I came up with for that right there. Obey your masters who are on earth. And notice I put according to the flesh who are on earth, just different phraseology, with trembling, in heartfelt sincerity, in sincerity of heart, as of obeying Christ, as to Christ. Don't obey to please men. That comes from this phrase right here, not by way of eye service as man pleasers. Obey Christ during God's will. This phrase right here. Render service with goodwill. Render service with goodwill. Render service. And notice, as serving the Lord, not as serving men, knowing the Lord will repay you. They come right from here. There you go. So here's a way that is way clearer than that, isn't it? When you see it that way, it makes it very clear as to what the text is saying and what's talking about what. That's what you need to get to as an expositor. If you want to be an expositor, you have to get to this level where you're saying this is primary and this is secondary. This is what's the main thing is, and this is what's talking about the main thing. And if you can't get to that level, you can't be an expositor. So that's what we're trying to help you do. Here's another one, okay? 2 Corinthians 3, 4 through 6. Such confidence we have through Christ towards God. Not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God, who also made us adequate as servants of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, for the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now, I just taught on this. I was preparing it last week, so I taught on this in our Anchor University hour. It's our Sunday school hour, and you can go on the website, anchorbiblechurch.org, and you can find this. I taught about 40 minutes on this, so you can hear me kind of preach it and what it means. But notice here's our text, right? We're going to break it down, and again, you can do this with a piece of paper and pencil, or just a word processor, and make this font color coded if you want. I'm just geeky, so I do this. But notice the repeat here of 5 and 6 of the word adequate, adequate, adequate. So you can see that kind of theme is being emphasized, right? So what am I going to do when I have my text? I'm going to get ready. I observe the text carefully. I just read it carefully. What's talking about what? What's the thing being talked about here? You know, what's the person, place, or thing being talked about? And what is it or is it doing? And what's modifying what? You know, what is the primary emphasis? What is the secondary emphasis? That's what I'm trying to find out. Create an outline that reflects the inspired emphasis of your text, which I have down here, and we'll go into that in a second. So, write a proposition that reflects and submits to your outline. Again, I'm going to give you examples of this in a second. Write a sermon outline that reflects your outline and proposition. So you have your proposition, your outline, and your sermon title. They should all reflect what the text actually says, and that is what you want to do. So when I look at this right here, I have such confidence we have. So it's speaking of ministry, confidence in doing ministry. Paul's defending his apostolic ministry. He's saying, you know, I have confidence in doing my ministry. And where does it come from? Through Christ, which means because I'm saved by grace and I know Jesus Christ is my Savior. And I have confidence because I'm not doing it for myself. It's towards God. It is to glorify the Lord. And not that we are adequate in ourselves. He just wants to make clear that we don't have a confidence in ourselves because we think that in ourselves, in our flesh, we are adequate to consider anything that's coming from ourselves. He says the two things basically in the same way, right? To not be adequate in yourselves is also to consider anything that's coming from yourself, right? Yeah. He's just saying whatever we do that gives glory to God does not come from us. It's given to us there. But our adequacy is from God. See? Comes from God. Okay? And now these 5 phrases here are going to tell us about what God does for us, how our adequacy comes from God. Because God also made us adequate as good servants of the new covenant. Now, this is cool because in the old covenant, remember, there were blessings for obedience and cursings for disobedience, right? And if you didn't obey, you would be cursed. But if you obeyed, you would be blessed. But the new covenant, the covenant that the church is under now, that Jesus inaugurated in his blood when he died on the cross, as he tells us in the Lord's Supper, this is the new covenant in my blood. Okay, the new covenant, which is great, is I'm going to bless you so that you obey. And of course, if you look up the new covenant text, I will put my spirit within you. I will give you a new heart. I will cause you to walk on my way. See, God is the one who blesses the undeserving by grace so that they obey. It's very different than the previous covenant, the law of Moses, which said you need to obey so you can be blessed, and if you don't obey, you'll be cursed. For the new covenant, Jesus takes our curse upon himself and blesses us so that we obey. It gives us everything we need to obey. It's pretty cool. So notice here the outline that I have. Do have confidence in Jesus Christ to the glory of God. That comes, have confidence through Jesus Christ to God. There we go. Do not have confidence. How? Not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as coming from ourselves, in your adequacy, in your self-sufficiency. No, that's not how you become confident. And then third, have adequacy from God. Where did I get that from? Adequacy is from God. There it is. Notice how it comes right from the text. And then these are the phrases that kind of come from, and I actually broke up a couple of these: who makes us adequate, who makes us new covenant servants. I took this one phrase, this longer phrase, and broke it in two because I'm just going to say who makes us adequate, and then as servants of the new covenant is what he makes us adequate to do. So I broke that up in two. That's why there's 6 points here instead of 5, because if I was preaching, I'd want to comment on those separately. And then not servants of the law, the letter of the law, servants of the Spirit, there it is. Legalism kills, the letter kills. The Holy Spirit gives life, there it is. Notice how the whole outline, all the subpoints come from the text, not ideas that I generate into my mind, not feelings, not what I sense, not what I remember from other texts. I actually get it from the text, and that's what you're supposed to do. So let's move on and see how this is me putting my sermon notes together. Okay, remember I told you I have a template. I showed you that last time, and I just start filling it in. So I have get your adequacy from God. Here's the ABC, U, anchor U, the date. There's the text. I don't have an opener. I don't have any background and context yet. Here's the text. Here's the proposition, and here's the outline. Here's the outline from what we just looked at, that diagram. Now, I might change this as I'm working on my sermon and reword it or whatever. But here's my proposition, which is when you tell them what you're going to tell them before you tell them. Remember, the 3 things that you're going to do is, in your proposition is, this is what I'm going to tell you. And then in the main body of the sermon, talk, or devotion is you telling them. And then the conclusion is telling them what you told them. Okay, so that's what you're doing. So here in your proposition, remember we have a second person plural noun proposition with the so that statement. So what do we mean by second person? We mean that it contains the word you. Do you see the word you here and you here and you're here? Okay, I want it to be second person because I want them to know that the whole sermon, talk, or devotion is for them. Not just a little bit of the application, the whole thing. It's for you, your life. You're living for Jesus, okay? So I want it to be second person. Now, it may not include a you if I just have a command in there, because all commands imply second person. So when you tell your child, make your bed, you're saying you make your bed, right? You're speaking to them personally. And that's why this phrase here, I could have titled this, Get Adequacy from God. And that word get implies you need to get adequacy from God. But I just made it more clear, more personal, get your adequacy from God, so people know that this sermon, talk, or devotion is about getting your adequacy from God, right? Because the whole Bible, we teach the Bible so people will obey it. And I don't want them to think I'm giving them a lecture about dead people. I want them to understand what God has for them in the text. So that's what I'm doing. And then I have this outline here, right? And I have taken each portion of the text that relates to that outline point, put it in there, and then I've broken it up. So what I've done is I open my template, I add the place, date, and text, I insert the text, I write the outline, I write the proposition to submit to the outline, I add text under each main point, so I do have confidence and put whatever text goes into that, and then I break it up into the portions of the text I'm going to comment on. Why? Why do that? Well, for several reasons, because when I start collecting data, like in a phrase search or word searches or looking at commentaries, or I have a good illustration idea, or I think of something or some other text or whatever that relates to that text or whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm putting it in for, I can put the information in the exact right spot. So I'm not trying to unscramble an exegetical lumber pile. I have, look at verse 4, such confidence we have. There it is. So look at the middle of verse 4. Look at the end of verse 4. Now, why do I do that? Why do I keep saying look at verse 4, the middle of verse 4, the end of verse 4? I have second point, look at verse 5, look towards the beginning of verse 5. Then I have the third point, look at the middle of verse 5, look at verse 6, look at the middle of verse 6, look again to the middle of verse 6, look towards the end of verse 6, look at the end of verse 6. Why do I do that? Why do I tell people specifically where to look. Because when you're teaching a text, the text is very familiar to you because you've been studying it forever, right? You've been going through it and reading it and breaking it down and word studies and commentaries and refining your notes or whatever. I mean, it's super familiar to you, but the people who are listening to you, it's not familiar. They get it one time and one time only. So if you have a text, and this is a pretty small text, right? If you have a text, this blue part here, the text, and you were to say, now look at our text and notice what it says. Where are people going to look? They're going to start reading the whole thing, trying to scan the text to see where you're talking about what you're talking about, right? They're going to be lost. And while you're speaking, explaining the text or illustrating it or whatever, they are left behind, stuck in this kind of forest, trying to find the right tree in the forest that you just referenced, but you didn't reference clearly. That's why Walt Kaiser taught me, keep your finger in the text. In other words, as you teach a text, you let people know exactly what you're talking about and where it's to be found in the text, so people know the authority is in the text, not you. You are getting your stuff from the text, and they can see it because you pointed out to them. Look at verse 4. Look at the middle of verse 4. Look at the end of verse 4. See, that is what helps you teach the word to people. And when they go away, they go, wow, I learned this not from the teacher, the preacher, the person giving the devotion. They learn it from who? The text. The text. The text. That's why you keep referring to the text, so people don't get lost and they can just find what you're saying quickly and then follow along. So then you divide the text under each main point, which is what we did. And again, we're going to show you how to do this a little bit more later, but this is the beginning. This is the blank of my sermon notes. Now notice, once you have this done, you have your title, proposition, and outline. Under each outline point, the portion of text you're going to comment, and you're going to break up maybe that text because you want to comment on different phrases. Now, whatever information you receive from any resource or illustration idea or whatever, you could just put it into the exact spot, right? And then it's way easier to smooth out your sermon, and it's going to save you a ton of time because you have a place to put everything. It's not an exegetical lumber pile. All right, moving on. Now I've taken that same thing we just saw on the previous page, and I'm beginning to flesh it out. Remember, I didn't have any opener or background information. So now I'm going to start writing my sermon, talk, or devotion. So what do? Well, Paul is in the thick of defending himself, his character, his motives, and qualifications as an apostle of Jesus Christ. The false apostles and teachers were claiming the apostle Paul was a fraud because he didn't have any letters of recommendation like they had. But in the near preceding context, the apostle Paul tells the Corinthians that they were his letter of recommendation. He led them to the Lord, helped them plant their church, stayed with them for a year and a half, teaching them the whole counts of God's word and sound doctrine. Their salvation, sanctification in the Lord were his letter. A letter which the false apostles and teachers did not have. They weren't leading people to the Lord, planting churches, or training people in sound doctrine. They were all air, boasting, name-dropping, but had no history of actually doing gospel ministry. Their so-called letters were either forged or fake or from unknown entities, and now the Apostle Paul is going to continue to defend his character, reputation, apostleship, and ministry by telling the Corinthians how he was made adequate to be an apostle of Jesus Christ, a gospel preacher, and church planter. So notice this part here is my front porch of the sermon. It's like right before I step over the threshold actually into the text. I'm going to read the text next, but notice how it prepares people and gives them a flow of the context. Remember we said your job as a teacher is not just to teach the text in isolation, divorced from its context, but to give people enough information so they understand the flow of the stream leading up to the bridge that you're standing on, so they know what direction the text is going in and how your text fits into the flow of the context, right? That's what you're trying to do. So then I would read the text, then I would give the proposition where I tell them what I'm going to tell them, and then I begin to tell them in the main body of the sermon. Have confidence, such confidence we have. Just stop there and consider that the Apostle Paul had confidence to be an apostle, preacher, etc. And I start quoting verses, a few cross-references. I explain. I go in the middle of verse 4, look at the middle of verse 4. Confidence was through Christ. What does that mean? I explain it. And then I'm just kind of going through. I go through the whole sermon that way. I blow it out without looking at commentaries, but considering the flow of the context and what this probably means in the flow of the context. I might do word studies, I might do phrase studies, but I'm not doing any commentary yet. Okay? I'm just getting all this done until I have my sermon notes completed. I mean, the rough draft of them. And they may be too big. They pretty much are every week. I have way too much intel. But just doing this is like the beginning of a lot of good things. Now, let's talk about commentary. So after you get to that place, after you get it kind of blown out, get your rough draft, you probably want to read some commentaries to see if your ideas and thoughts and interpretations of a text, your initial interpretations are sound, because if somebody hasn't come up with what you came up with in the last 2,000 years, it's probably wrong. So let's move on and talk about different kinds. I'm just going to talk about different kind of categories of commentaries, and then we'll give you some examples of each so you can kind of see what they are. There's 1 or 2 volume commentaries on the whole Bible. There are verse-by-verse word study commentaries that kind of get into the Greek. I'm going to show you this in just a minute. Critical commentaries, these deal with grammar and syntax and the Greek and the Hebrew and problems and solutions in the original languages. They're kind of, if you haven't taken the original languages, you might want to skip these. Then you have expositional commentaries. These are like expository sermons put into a commentary. So they may get into a little structure, a little word studies and stuff, but they're not technical. They're not using Hebrew and Greek, no original languages. Then you have devotional commentaries, and these are the commentaries that are very simple and practical. They just they just tell you this is what it means and this is how it applies. They don't give you all their reasoning and thoughts into coming up with what they're saying. They just stay on the surface, on the big picture, what's obviously true there. And so those are kind of the different kinds of commentaries you're going to encounter. So 1 or 2 volume commentaries, and again, these are just commentaries in the whole Bible, and they come in 1 or 2 volumes or whatever. And because they're on the whole Bible, you're not going to get a lot of detail, right? Because they're on the whole Bible, and so they don't have enough time, but just a quick reference. So you have something like Matthew Henry's commentary on the whole Bible. It's pretty big. The old versions were in multiple volumes, but you can get them in one fat volume now. I've got this in Logos. John Gill, an exposition of the New Testament, again in Logos. Walvoord and Zuck, Bible Knowledge Commentary, comes in 2 volumes. I'll give you examples of these. John MacArthur, Bible Commentary. Owen Collins, the Classic Bible Commentary. So these are just different things. Charles Pfeiffer, the Wycliffe Bible Commentary. These are kind of just, if you wanted just a little bit of intel and everything, you can do that. I'll just show you over here. Let me just change this real quick to my study layout so you can kind of see what I do here. So over here's the MacArthur. This is the study Bible, very similar to his commentaries. Commentaries got a little bit more detail, but this just goes through the verses, verse by verse, gives you some basic interpretations, some key cross-references. This right here is the 2-volume Bible Knowledge Commentary. It gives you, again, comments on different phrases, gives you some key cross-references, some basic interpretation. So I have those. I may consult those up front before I finish the rough draft of my sermon. I can't even think of what the text means. It's like, what is he talking about here? I don't even know anything about this. This is an odd thing, or this is a weird phrase, and what does this mean? Sometimes you just need a little bit of help. It's like, okay, and then you prime your mind based off your favorite 1 volume. So I've got MacArthur and Walvoord and Zuck, and I just I say, okay, I think it's talking about this, and I give my initial interpretation. I'm still going to read other commentaries later, but sometimes if it's really difficult, I might have to consult those first. Then I go about the different kinds of commentaries. These are, again, verse by verse. Marvin Vincent's Word Studies of the New Testament. I'll show you examples of this. A.T. Robertson's, Cleon Rogers' Linguistic Key. I should have a little key to the New Testament. The last one is a little bit complex, but it basically goes through, the New Testament, and it lists all the key Greek words and gives you their definitions. It's like a little cheat sheet. If you're taking Greek, it's an ultimate cheat sheet to help you kind of find intel. But let me just give you some examples of Marvin Vincent here. So we've got this right here, his Word Studies in the New Testament, okay? And this is Marvin Vincent, so we'll see what it says here. So here's an example. So notice how it goes through the text and just has be instant, and he comments on that. In season, comments on that. Out of season, comments on that. Reprove, comments on that. Rebuke, comments on that. He just goes through the text and comments on some key phrases, gives you definitions, gives you key cross-references. If you have Logos, you can just hold your arrow on there and it'll just bring up the text, so it's kind of handy, isn't it? So that is what I mean by kind of a verse-by-verse word study. Here's Robertson's, same type of thing. Let me just open this up so you can kind of see how it works. Oh, this is Wiest. This is another one that's nice. It's good to use. Wiest didn't finish the whole New Testament, but if you look at this, you'll just see he comments on things, comments on things, comments on things, comments on things. Now he's in verse 3. Again, just kind of goes through dealing with key words or concepts. Here's Robertson's right here. Let me just show you this one. So you have preach the word, comments on it, a couple cross references, be instant, in season and out of season, comments on that. Notice how he does give the Greek, but he also transliterates it so you can read it if you don't understand Greek. He gives you the Greek tense and stuff. So this is kind of like the linguistic key to the New Testament by Cleon Rogers and that I mentioned earlier. It's a little bit more technical, but anyways, you can go through here and it just gives you kind of key stuff on, it's a first aorist active imperative. Now, if you don't know what that is, then it doesn't really help, right? So it helps if you know in this resource a little bit more, but that just gives you an idea of kind of some word study type stuff, okay? Then you have Vine's collected writings. Vine is easier to get to. He's got a collected writings. It's not all the New Testament, it's just part. He goes through different verses and gives key words, transliterates it for you. It's more accessible. And so if the book you're studying is in his 5 volumes, it will be helpful for you to use that. Know about the different kinds of commentaries and when to use them. Critical commentaries focus on grammar and syntax and word meanings and word problem solutions, often the original languages. Now, if I'm going through a thing, I may read 1 to 3 critical commentaries up front because I just want to make sure I didn't miss some like odd grammatical nugget or something. And so I might read those up front. The New International Greek Testament Commentary, Peter Lang, Commentary on the Holy Scriptures, theological journal articles get real geeky, and they on problem text, they blow it all out. So let me just go over here and see if I have something to. Here's Lang right here. Oops. So let me just show you. Open and floating window. Let me crank this up so you can see this a little bit better. Notice how he's quoting the Greek, and he's dealing with, here's the Vulgate, and he's referencing all this. You can still use it if you don't know the original languages, but there's going to be a lot of stuff in here that you're like, what, what's he talking about? Anyways, so you can see there's a lot of interaction. So there's quote some Latin, so you can. What's cool is you can do this type of thing here in Logos, and you can highlight it and you can actually have it translated for you if you want. So you can it'll go through the part that you highlight, and it'll say, see, there it is. There's the Latin translation of the part that I just highlighted. So again, if you don't have Logos, I feel sorry for you, but you can still get by without it. I just want to show you what it means to have a more critical commentary. Then you kind of have expositional commentaries. Okay, these are the commentaries, kind of like John MacArthur commentaries or what, where basically they're his sermons, kind of put in commentary form. Michael Martin, New American Commentary Series, Warren Wiersbe, Bible Exposition Commentary, John Calvin's commentaries. He just goes through the text. Don't be afraid to look at Calvin. You know, I mean, he's just when he goes through passages, it's very simple. It's for normal people. It's not technical. And he's just got some great insights. Harold Hoehner, like Cornerstone Biblical Commentary, you know, he did his one on Ephesians, which is probably the best Ephesians commentary ever written. It just includes all the views from all the commentaries. It's giant and, you know, it's just massive expositional commentary. D. Edmond Hebert is just a fabulous expositor. And if you can get, you know, any of his commentaries, he doesn't have them, doesn't have them on all the books of the New Testament, but the ones he does have are fabulous. They're very clear. They're easy to understand. They're full of nuggets. D. Edmond Hebert. Then about devotional commentaries. These are commentaries, again, which say this is what it means, this, that applies. And sometimes these are helpful because at the end of my sermon, if I'm thinking, my sermon is good, I think I interpret the text well, but I just need some more application. These are the kind of ones you might want to go to find some application. You know, J. Vernon McGee, Through the Bible Commentary, where he basically says, it says this, it means that, and this is how you apply it. Henry Ironside commentaries are simple, they're straightforward. This is what the text says, and what it means and how it applies. It's not technical, it's not expositional, it's just, that. Even R. Kent Hughes's commentaries, which are kind of expositional, but they're very leaning towards devotional. They're very easy to understand, they're full of practical application, and you can use those. And then as you read through your commentaries, remember, reading commentaries are for checking and affirming your work, not for doing your work for you. Let that sink in. Okay? There's a lot of people who wait too long to start preparing. They procrastinate. At the last minute, they try to put something together. They just read a bunch of commentaries and synthesize whatever they like from their commentaries. They're not really paying attention to the flow of the context. They're not letting it work on their own heart. They're robbing the people they teach. They're robbing themselves of sanctification. They're robbing God of glory. They're not being diligent workmen who handle accurately the word of truth. They're just becoming thieves of other people's works. Now, we're all that way and to some degree, but it's best to work through the text, do it from your own head, do your initial interpretation based off the flow of the context, phrase searches, word searches, and then you can use commentaries to check your rough draft and refine your rough draft. So you check your initial interpretation, you modify it if necessary. You look up and add to your sermon notes any helpful cross-references, And again, when you use cross-references, you always check the context of those cross-references. Add to your sermon notes helpful quotes or insights or illustrations from the commentaries you read. Summarize your sermon notes, helpful insights and or comparisons or contrasts that you find in your commentaries. So that's what you use commentaries for. They give you more information. Now, this is how I do it. I blow it out, rough draft. I come back and read commentaries, and then it really gets big. And then I have to go back and chop it down, and chop it down again, and chop it down again. And a lot of times I have to go through it 3 or 4 times to get it chopped down because there's way too much every single sermon, no matter what size the text is. It's just the way it is. So what do you do when commentators disagree on the meaning of your text? That's something you're going to run into pretty much every single week. If you have a bunch of commentaries, like I have a bunch of commentaries, like look at these ones here. Okay, I have more and more and more and more and more. All these commentaries right here, all of these commentaries are all on 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2. Look at them. Look at it. So if you read a lot of commentaries, you are going to run into people who disagree. So let's just say you have 3 or 4 or 5 really good commentaries. You've done your research, you've asked your pastor, you've talked to people online, you've taught through the book and said, yeah, these are the best ones. And you read and you have 5 commentaries with 5 different interpretations. Sometimes that happens because there's certain texts that are just hard to understand. So what do? Like, all these guys are scholars, all these guys have written commentaries, and now there's just you. It's like, I don't know. If they don't know, I don't know. So this is what you do. This is how you deal with it. 1, consider where they are coming from hermeneutically. Okay, what do I mean by that? What system of interpretation do they use? So if they're from the Reformed camp, they're going to believe usually in replacement theology, covenant theology. They're going to believe Israel is the church. And so if it's speaking of the Old Testament and or Israel or whatever, that might account for some of the differences because they're using a different system to derive information or read information into the text. Consider their denomination, theological camp, and creed. You know, if you have Louis Burkhoff over here and you have John Wesley over here, I mean, they're going to be in a radically different theological camp, and their theological camp and their creed or whatever is going to taint and help steer their thing because they believe in a certain thing, so they're going to see the Bible through that lens, and you just need to be aware of that. Consider which commentators have the most thorough defense of their view. How many of them go through the text in more detail, referencing the text, good cross-references, arguing for their view. That's the one you normally want to lean towards. As a rule, lean towards the majority view. You know, if you have 15 commentaries and there's 5 different views, which view do the most people take? Now again, sometimes I go against what the majority view, but as a rule, you lean towards a majority view, and as a rule, take the interpretation that best fits the flow of the near context in your text. This is the number 5 is the most important thing. When you find disagreements, ask yourself, which of these interpretations would the original audience have understood based on the flow of the context coming towards the text and coming away from the text? That is what usually helps you go, you know what? This guy is super good. He's technical, but he's got his blinders on the text. He's not noticing the flow of the context. And so I take whatever view fits the flow of the context the best. All right, so the order I like to read my different commentaries. This is a summary. First, 1 or 2 volume commentaries like we showed you. Might want to do that even if we have issues trying to figure out what the text says and you're trying to make a rough draft of your sermon notes. You have no idea what to write down. You might do, some of that. Second, word study type commentaries. Third, critical commentaries. Fourth, expositional commentaries. Fifth, devotional commentaries. Sixth, you're blowing out a doctrine. You read systematic, dogmatic theologies, Bible dictionaries, Bible encyclopedias, special works, whatever, to find whatever. Seventh, your text is a problem passage. You might want to read theological journals. I have those so I can go through theological journals and that kind of deal with like notoriously difficult texts. Anyways, there you have it. So I might work on something like that as I'm going through a passage. All right, so here's your homework for this week. Read Greg Harris's short blog post, The Making of an Expositor. This is super short, but if you go to the Master's Seminary website, you look at the URL that I listed here on the previous slide, this is it. It's like 1 page, 2 page. Yeah, just 1.5 pages or so. It's really easy, but it's clear, it's clean, it's yummy. Okay, so read Making of an Expositor. There you go. Listen to John MacArthur's sermon on 1 Corinthians 16:13, Principles for Powerful Living. There's the link that you can go there. So if you were to go to Grace to You, go to the website, gty.org, and you were to find this sermon from 1 Corinthians 16, Principles for Power of Living. I want you to listen to this, and as you listen to John preach through this sermon on the text that you did your homework on, you're going to hear him work through each of those 5 or 4 commands, principles for power living. And then you can kind of see somebody. I preached on this, but for some reason my sermon is not on my website, so I couldn't give you mine. But anyways, John, he does a good job. Anyways, then write an outline, proposition, and title for a sermon, talk, or devotion on 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18. Let me just go over there right now. Okay. 13 through 18, 16 through 18, 16 through 18. There it is right there. Okay, so this is your text right here. Therefore, we do not lose heart. But though our outer man is decaying, our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing in us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look at the things which are not seen, but the things which are seen, or look at the things that are seen, but not the things which are not seen. But the things that are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So this is your text, and you're going to have to work through it. Try to derive a syntactical outline, an outline that submits to the text, comes from the text. Once you get your outline, main things to the left, the things talking about them to the right. When you get your outline done, then write a propositional statement, a second person plural pronoun proposition with the so that statement, saying this text, whatever it is, I want to show you 3 or 6 or 4 or 10 or whatever your outline is. So that the reason you want to show them these things, the purpose, the application of the text, so that you can whatever, and then write your sermon title that submits to your proposition in your outline. Try to put in each of your outline points you, your, or have a command. Be this, get this, do this, okay? So we want to make your whole thing personal, whether it's a sermon, talk, or devotion. So when we come back, we'll work through that. I'll show you what I came up with, and you can then do it and have fun just studying the Word.
DrivenNails.com is a user-supported ministry.